And whenever you see 2160 or 216, that's 1080 doubled. So 1080 times 2 is 21, or 216 or 2160. And the significance of that is 2160 is the sum total of 6 times 6 times 6.
Is it true that the measurements... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's all I had.
Oh, is it true that the measurements of Stonehenge and the other sacred sites have a consistent number equality in their measurements?
Yeah, they've measured Stonehenge with rhomboids and all this stuff. But what's really key about that is that those numbers pop out as the most relevant. 666, 1080, 555, which is 555 times pi is 1746, or the sum total of 666 plus 1080. So whenever you see 555, that's that reference to the sacred marriage of opposites, the sacred marriage of the sun and the moon. So that number is relative to that. And we have earthworks in the Ohio Valley that are 555 also, several of them. So
the gematria...
all those numbers show up.
So the gematria within Stonehenge is also in the henges and earthworks in the Ohio Valley.
Not just a few, but consistent.
Right. I'm so excited. That's awesome.
So it's not like there's 1,000 earthworks and I found 3. It's every sun temple will have a corresponding gematria number to it. There's like 3 of the hinges that are 666 feet in circumference. Most run at 660, but 660 and 666 were both used interchangeably as sun numbers. And with that base 6, you have 660, and then you take 1 off to get the 6 or 666, or add that to the 666. But most of the hinges are at 660. And the square root of that is 210, and then we find 210 in linear works. Like at Portsmouth, the square had 2 large sacred vias that was 210 feet wide and 2,100 feet long, and then a lot of the earthworks, such as Newark, were 1,050. The circles were 1,050 feet, which is pretty consistent. And then, of course, that's 210 times 5. So we can take the 210 and either times pi to get the hinge, and then if we go times 5, we can get a lot of the other earthworks, such as High Banks and Newark and some of the things you can still see in Ohio. But that codex is run through all of the earthworks. We can take 5 numbers and use them for almost every earthwork in the Ohio Valley.
It's so interesting. Is there other references of the gematria in the Bible in relation to Christ?
Somewhat. 1080 is the number for the moon. The moon is the Earth Mother. Christ dies at 33. The square root of 1080 is 33. And then most of the gateways into the hinges are 33 feet. 33 repeats itself over and over and over again in the Ohio Valley. So 33 is the gateway in the earthworks. 33 is the gateway of Christ in the Bible. And in Genesis 1:11, it says in there that there was a common language. That there was a common language that existed all over the world. And you really can't think of it as actual words, but you think of it as shapes and numbers. And with the shapes and numbers, you would know what everything meant at a glance. And certainly that's the case through Stonehenge and the Ohio Valley, and that we can use those numbers in the Bible to help decode stuff in Ohio.
Just want to remind everybody that you're listening to Epic Voyages on Inception Radio Network. How about the symbols associated with the mounds?
Okay, well, the most obvious, of course, we'll go back to the hinge where we have a circular earthwork. We have the ditch going around it. We usually have a mound in the center, and that represents the all-seeing eye, also known as Og, the great eye in the sky. So the ogler. So when you Google something, you're actually more in reference to the all-knowing, seeing eye in the sky, which was Og. So when you say words like to goggle or to be googly-eyed or those, you're really in reference to that biblical character of Og that was like the sun deity to them. But so we have the circles, which always, especially if you have a dot in the middle of it, and that traces back to Sumer and Akkad. And then a square is representative of the four winds and the Earth Mother. So if you see a circle and a square together, then that is representative of the holy union of opposites, the sacred marriage. So you have the circle, the sun, and the square, the earth. And most of the earthworks in Ohio are based on one of those two shapes.
Are the swastikas in Levant and British Isles and Ohio Valley, or did you find them in the Ohio Valley?
Oh yeah, they're all over. They're found all over in mounds, and they made them out of copper, and they're found on pottery. The swastika is kind of interesting. It's generally perceived as a sun symbol, but then others say that the cross itself represents the four winds, so it's Earth Mother, and then the spokes on the outside represent the movement of the sun. So sometimes it's interpreted as a sun symbol, sometimes it's interpreted as symbolic of the sacred marriage. But wherever you find giants, you're going to find swastikas. So, yeah, the Levant, throughout England, there's all sorts of stones with swastikas on them, and then they're very prevalent also in the Ohio Valley, with the same meaning in all three spots, too. So it's one of those small things, but, all those small things kind of add up.
Sure they do.
Large in the end.
Absolutely.
Now, the Sioux, before we get off swastikas, now the Sioux called the swastika an Ogee, O-G-E-E. So there's a reference to Og.
Right.
So that's interesting. And also, Og meant chief in Hebrew, but it also means chief in Iroquois and almost all the Algonquin languages. And so there's part of the etymology that we also go into in the book of how we can find, the same language and the same interpretations of words throughout these three regions.
It's so interesting, Fritz. It really is. The Amorites' covenant with God. Can we talk about that just for a moment?
Yes. I'll try to remember. I'm not going to remember what quotes from the Bible these came from. But if you read the judgments, it's in Judges, I believe. They're talking about the king of Tyre. Well, Tyre's over there on the Mediterranean. That's an Amorite city. And in that quote, it says, when thou was created, when thou was in the Garden of Eden, when thou walkest amongst the midst of fire. So while he's being judged, he's being related to being created. And then that would go back to Genesis 6:4, that there were, giants in the earth in those days, and how those giants were created from this union of the angels, the fallen angels, which some people believe, and man to create this race of giants. So it's something that probably isn't going to come up in Sunday school. But
I actually said that earlier, Fritz. I'm like, where was I at this Bible study? I haven't heard this one. And some of these that I heard reference, but they're right there.
Yeah, I wish I had the actual biblical quote of what book and what phrase it's from, but it's very strange to read it. And then if you know the context of who these people were, and always keep it in mind that these were Cro-Magnon. These were the first men. So if you think of Adam as being Cro-Magnon, being an archaic type of humanoid. And that when it says thou was created, and then you think of, too, the missing link, they don't have anything past Cro-Magnon. So there's no evolutionary link from Cro-Magnon back. So as far as the Bible, and when I do presentations, it's like, I'm not going really against any biblical teachings whatsoever, because we don't have anything prior to that. But I think it's important to think that in biblical terms that's who they're talking about. When they're talking about Adam and Eve and when that was created, they're talking about Cro-Magnon.
Right, which once again had the elongated skulls, and wasn't there something with like the nerves that go into the chin that are completely different with modern skulls that we have today?
Yeah, now we find that more so with that first wave of hunters and fishers from 7,000 to 2,000, because they're showing more Neanderthal-like elements. And one of those is the mental foramen on the chin. And in modern men, it's under the canines, but under Neanderthals, it was under M1, or your first molar. So they're off to the side. So looking at a lot of the skeletal remains up around Michigan and Pennsylvania and the whole Great Lakes area, and then on the coastal regions also, we'll find the mental foramen on the side under M1, but along with that, we'll show the protruding brow ridge and no forehead at all, and they really look like archaic-type skeletons. And then you have that mental foramen on there, too, which is just an indicator. It's like, yeah, that guy had to have had Neanderthal genetic traits or a gene pool. And that's what's kind of confusing about this in the book, is that there's two waves that come through. There's that first wave of hunters and fishers that were really archaic.
Right.
And then the Amorites come in second. And while they still have those features, certainly they weren't as primitive looking as the hunters and fishers.
Getting back to the mounds, are you aware of any reported ley lines associated with these mounds?
Yeah, there's only one for sure ley line that I have found. And if you draw a line between Mound State Park, which is a hinge center, Mound State Park, and then there's another hinge center in Newcastle, Indiana, and then there's another hinge group in Cambridge City, those were laid out on a line of 33 degrees, pointing both northwest and southeast, but they're aligned to both the summer solstice sunset and the winter solstice sunrise, and they're about 20 miles apart. And that is definitely a ley line right there. And I think there's some more ley lines that possibly could be found. What's tough is that you started out with 10,000 mounds in Ohio, 8,000 in Indiana, so we have 18,000 mounds just between those two states. And now there's 200 mounds left. So whatever percentage 200 is of 18,000. So it makes it hard.
Right. Are you familiar with the Pinson mounds in Tennessee?
The Pinson, yes. I'm not real familiar, but yeah, I know them.
Okay. Are they the same type of mounds that you're studying?
The Pinsons, I'm not sure about that, because when you get south, you run into a lot of Mississippian era, which is going to take you about 300 years past the Adena Hopewell. I know you have a stone fort down in Tennessee that could be more contemporary with the Adena Hopewell. The Pinson, I'm not sure just off the top of my head, but I am familiar with those. But a lot of the stuff down there around Tennessee and Georgia might have been like the last remnants of these people who had built them, but they're generally a little bit later, time period wise.
What happens to these mounds? I know with the Pinson mounds, there's a big archaeological dig. And I often wondered what happened with some of these structures.
Well, that is the main problem right now, and especially here in the Midwest is the mounds around the Great Lakes have been traced back to the Iroquois. The mounds in the Ohio Valley have been traced back to the Sioux. And those mounds probably down around Tennessee, some of them, especially towards the Mississippi, were probably Natchez. We know, and 100 years ago, you could have read books and read about who all the mound builders were through linguistic studies, through legends. So, the Sioux had legends of being in the Ohio Valley. There's a ton of information. However, with the advent of archaeological schools and the Smithsonian Institute, they've made a pact that tribal affiliations would not be given in any kind of archaeological report. So when they passed the Native American Graves Protection Act in 1993, they put a stipulation in there that it only applied to known tribes. Well, they've not attributed any known tribe to being mound builders, so it was just another one of those government laws. It wasn't a law at all, because the universities will never say, this is Natchez, this is Sioux, this is Iroquois. They'll just leave it under this erroneous mound builders, and they dig at will. So the greatest threat of all of the mounds are the universities. And after 100 years of digging, they can't tell you who the Adena Hopewell were, where they came from, or where they went. But they will get a grant, and it's all about grant money, get a grant to destroy a mound, to write a paper, to further somebody's career, and all of our mounds are being destroyed so some yuts from a university can write a paper and maybe get a better job at a bigger university. So we're sacrificing our whole ancient past to these university criminals.
Because you can't put these back correctly. I mean, they're disturbed.
No, and I just had somebody on my blog post, and I could tell it was either somebody from the DNR or the universities, and they were saying that, well, the universities only dig into a mound if it's going to be destroyed by a road or construction or something like that.
Oh, no.
And I just got back from Fairbanks, and Indiana University was down there. This thing's in the middle of a woods, and they dug a big hole in it. So, their line is a lie. So if you say we don't dig into mounds, I'll take you to 20 places and show you holes they've dug in the last 3 or 4 years. So, and that's the DNR, the Indiana Historical Society, the Ohio State Historical Society. I'm sure your Tennessee Historical Society is in cahoots with it. But it's all this lie that they tell. But they control the media, they control the message, and so there's just people like me and now you, where we're trying to get the message out and let people know. It's like if a university archaeologist comes to your door, throw him out.
You got it. You got it, Fritz. We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we are going to ask Fritz an amazing question. It's all about my obsession, Mothman, and you guys are going to have to put a seatbelt on because this is going to be awesome, and we'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Just a reminder that you are listening to Epic Voyages, and I am Chase Kloetzke here with Fritz Zimmerman. You guys, this went by so fast. He's an amazing guest. We have a few short minutes with him left before we open up the chat for questions and the phone lines. And I just want to remind our listeners that you can Skype us at Inception Radio Network, or you can call 888-919-2355, and you can personally talk to Fritz yourself. So, Fritz, welcome back.
Well, thank you.
And break. I'm dying to ask you about Mothman experience that you had. I'm in love with Mothman. He's my obsession. So, do you mind telling our listeners about that?
No, and it was actually by chance, and I didn't even know it was Mothman when I met Mothman. It wasn't until I got home and was telling a friend, and he said, well, do you know about Mothman? And I said, no, never heard of it. So anyway, he pulled me in, and then it became even more of a horror story because I could have a face to the name or a face to the voice or whatever. But let me preface before talking about this that a burial mound is, when we're talking about burial mounds all throughout the Ohio Valley, to know that they worshiped their ancestors, and the mounds represented this belief that their ancestors formed a collective of the dead, and that if you go to a mound site a lot of times, you might have chills run down your whole body, you might have goosebumps all over you, and that energy is still around. And the Mothman shows up a lot of times where burial mounds are, and especially where Point Pleasant is, because that's the mouth of the Kanawha River, or Point Pleasant, I guess is the name of the town over there. Well, yes. I was in Ohio, and my last stop of the day was in Gallipolis, and Gallipolis is across the river from Point Pleasant, and it sits on a really high bluff. And what was interesting is the Kanawha River is the mouth right there, and then downriver is Charleston, where the 666s and all the 555s, and that was really the Adena capital at the end of that river. And I was up and I was shooting a mound on a bluff. It was the last shot of the day. A lot of times when I'm on a mound trip, I may cover 700 miles in one day, so long days. And it was towards the evening, and one of the very few shots that I took of just the terrain, but I was on this bluff and I was looking towards Point Pleasant and the bridge and the mouth of the Kanawha, and I took a photo. And I snapped it, and as soon as I took the photo, there was a voice that said, "Nice evening, isn't it?" And it was as close as somebody that was 5 feet in front of me. And I stopped. I thought, well, that was strange. And I looked around. Of course, I'm up on this bluff, and there's nobody up there, and it's a steep road to get up to this small cemetery. And just thought, well, that was odd. But, your first thing isn't, that's a demon. It's like, well, voices travel strange. And so you tried to dismiss it. So I got in the car, took my photo, got in the car to leave. I got to where the entrance is to go back down this steep hill, and the car lunged left. And I went right by the entrance. And I thought, well, that was strange. And I thought maybe what happened was that one of the wheels hit like a hole or something, and it just janked the wheel. But I didn't remember seeing that, and it seemed pretty flat. So I drove around the cemetery back to the entrance again, and when I got there, this time the steering wheel kind of violently went to the left.
Oh, my gosh.
Like in my hand. And at that point, it was like, okay, this is really strange. But still, something inside of you says, I don't know why it's doing this, but, I'd already dismissed that there's no holes because I got up there and it's like, well, this is perfectly flat. So went around and this time kind of experimented with it, but got up to where the entrance was, and I just put my fingers on the steering wheel, and it just turned. It turned in my hands.
Oh,
and back around I went. So by the time it was like, okay, now there's something really strange going on up there, and with the voice and everything else. What I ended up doing was I opened my car door, I stuck my left leg out, and I walked that car out.
Oh, my God, with your leg?
A foot at a time.
Oh, no.
1 foot on the ground. 1 foot on the ground until I got that car pointed down that hill, and I went like a bat out of hell out of there. And I drove to Charleston, and I swear to God, I looked in my rearview mirror 1,000 times. I swear there was somebody sitting in the back seat.
Oh, my gosh.
And then the next morning, I went and I checked my oil, which I always do in the morning when I'm on mound trips, and I gas up. My car only held 4 quarts of oil, And I put 4 quarts of oil in it. And I was looking underneath, and the car wasn't drinking oil, and it had no history of losing oil. But I put 4 quarts of oil in my car. Somehow I lost all my oil. And then it was just mayhem the whole next day. Then I was on my way from 1666 earthwork over into Kentucky into another. And the car just went crazy all day. And I looked in the rearview mirror 1,000 times. I swear there was somebody sitting back there. And it was just the most creeped out day that I've ever had mounding. And eventually it stopped, like 24 hours after being up there at sunset, because I didn't think I was going to get the car home. And everything stopped, and the car ran fine and everything, and I made it home. But when I got home, then I told my friend, I said, oh, my gosh. I said, it was just nuts. And they was telling him about Gallipolis, and he's like, again, so he said, you know about Mothman? I was like, no. And then I found out about it. I was like, oh, geez.
Yeah, it made the whole thing much worse.
Yeah, and I have a photo. I have it in the book, and I have it posted somewhere. It might be on Facebook, but you can see a face where I took the photo up there at the Gallipolis Cemetery. There's a face in the brush right when I took the photo, and then as soon as I got done is when the voice asked. It was like, nice evening, isn't it?
Ooh. What did the voice sound like? I mean, was it just like a man?
Nasally. It was like, nice evening, isn't it? So like a nasally.
Oh, really? Mothman sounds like a wuss?
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
it wasn't like a deep
sad.
guttural get out or anything like that. No, it was it was like somebody you would meet on the street.